Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to make the most popular flavor dumplings, the pork and cabbage dumpling from scratch. And as usual, I'm going to lead you through the process step by step and explain to you what each steps do to the dish so you can truly understand the process to avoid failure. Check it out. Hi friends, it's Erica right here. I'm a Taiwanese citizen currently living in America. Cooking and traveling are my passion, so I'm here to share with you my favorite Asian recipes. I make kitchen trivia, short and Asian home cooking recipe on this channel, so if that interests you, please subscribe and keep watching. Chinese New Year is finally around the corner. How are you planning to celebrate this year? In our last week video, we talked about the most popular tradition that we do on the Chinese New Year, and we also mentioned how the Chinese New Year's Eve dinner is the most important meal of the year. On this special holiday, there's many special dishes to serve for your family, just like Thanksgiving, such as a whole fish, because in Chinese, fish has the same pronunciation as surplus. And have a surplus at the end of the year means less struggle for the upcoming year, which means an increase in prosperity. And certain fruits such as tangerine represent good luck. Whole chicken also represent luck and wholeness. And last but not least, we definitely have to talk about dumplings. For a history of over 1800 years, dumpling is a classic lucky food for the Lunar New Year's. This traditional dish is wildly popular in China, especially in the northern China. Wrapping your own dumpling at home on a Chinese New Year Eve with your children and family is a very popular activity that we do on Chinese New Year. So today I'm going to teach you step by step on how to make your own pork and cabbage dumpling at home. So without further ado, screenshot! Here's the ingredient that we'll need for today's recipe. To make a pork and cabbage dumpling, we obviously will need some ground pork and cabbage. To cover up the pork gaminess, we'll need some ginger and scallion. And for the seasoning, we'll need some soy sauce, sesame oil, salt, sugar, white pepper powder, and some broth. For a beginner, making dumpling might be very overwhelming. So on today's video, I don't want to give you too much to chew on. We're going to focus on how to make the stuffing and the process of wrapping dumplings. For the dumpling wrapper, you can easily find these in the Asian supermarket, especially during the holiday season. But if you're interested on how to make your own wrapper as well, on our next week video, I'm going to teach you how to make a colorful dumpling wrapper like this. So don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for that. So with that being said, let's talk stuffing. For the pork and cabbage dumpling, obviously the most important ingredients are, well, pork and cabbage. The cabbage that I get today is the Taiwanese cabbage. The leaves are crispy, crunchy, and sweet. You can find this type of cabbage in many places. It doesn't have to be the Taiwanese brand. But Taiwanese or not, you want to make sure you get your hands on this type of cabbage. The cabbage cannot be replaced with the purple cabbage because that will make the dumpling more bitter. And it cannot be replaced with the napa cabbage either because napa cabbage is not going to be crispy after boiling and it waters way more than the normal cabbage. And for the ground pork, there's 3 parts of the pig that we use the most in dumplings. The best choice of it all is the pork butt. Either the shoulder butt or the collar butt will do. The pork butt is the part where a pig exercises a lot. It is more lean than fat, but with a good marbleized fat in between. If you find some of the dumpling that you ate before that is too greasy, it is most likely because of the pork fat ratio. The second most popular part is the front hock. Front hock is the most tender part of the pork. This type of tender pork is great for steaming and boiling. It is easy to chew and aren't too greasy either. Last but not least is our pork belly, especially the lower belly though. In Chinese, we call it upper belly and the lower belly, but here you cut the pork a little bit different, so I believe it is called the side or bacon. The upper pork belly is fatter than the lower ones, that's why the lower one is better. If you prefer a more juicy and greasy texture, the pork belly will be your best choice. But if you can't find any of these, just a normal ground pork will work. But if you have a choice of the fat ratio, make sure it's around 40% fat, 60% lean. So more lean than fat. Now we got our ingredients ready, let's make our stuffing. Put your ground pork into a big mixing bowl. Add in the minced ginger to cover up the pork gaminess, soy sauce for the umami and a little bit of saltiness, sesame oil and white pepper powder for aroma, and some scallion to top it up. And last but not least, some salt and sugar. Scallion and pork match really well together. But there's also another use for scallion, which it can balance out the saltiness from the soy sauce and the salt that we add earlier. So understanding this, you can know that in the future, if you make your dumpling too salty, you can add more scallion into your mixing. And if it's too plain, you can also add some soy sauce to increase the saltiness. So soy sauce will increase saltiness and scallion will lower the saltiness. Now, either using a chopstick, fork, or your hand, mix in all the ingredients well together in one direction. You want to do this until the pork turns into a sticky, almost hairy consistency. The reason why you want to go in one direction only is to basically pull out the pork to bring out its stickiness. Some people like to smash the stuffing to make the pork more chewy and bouncy, but it is not necessary. This process takes me around 5 to 8 minutes. The longer you mix and smash, the more elastic and bouncy the stuffing's going to be. Now, cover it up with a plastic wrap and put it in the fridge for now and let the seasoning sink in while we prep our cabbage. There are two main steps that we want to do to our cabbage before we mix in with the pork: chopping and forcing out its water content. Chopping the cabbage into smaller pieces can make the texture of the stuffing more even. You see a lot of packaged dumpling with cabbage and pork mixed together because the cabbage can effectively balance out the greasiness of the pork fat. That makes the stuffing more refreshing than the pure pork dumpling. And forcing out the water content in the cabbage before mixing with the stuffing can prevent it from watering when we cook them later. Less water leak out, that means your dumpling is less likely to break as well. The most common way of forcing water content out of vegetable is to use salt to marinate it, but by doing that, it's a little bit hard to control the sodium content unless you're making kimchi. And we all know too much sodium intake is pretty harmful for our bodies. Not to mention how big of a mess we normally make when we're trying to chop cabbage when it's raw. So today I'm going to teach you a very special way to force out the water content as well as making it easier to chop. Bring a pot of water to boil and add in a teaspoon of salt. Toss in your roughly peeled off cabbage and blanch them in the water for 20 seconds in high heat. And when the time's up, put them straight into ice water to stop the remaining heat from keep cooking the cabbage. Doing this will give our cabbage a very mild salty taste and soften up the cabbage a bit to make it easier to chop later. You might worry about if boiling the cabbage is going to make it less crunchy and lost its texture, but trust me, just give it a little taste real quick and you'll see how it's still crispy and sweet. The cabbage will only turn mushy if you overboil them, so make sure the time is exactly 20 seconds and you take it right out. If you're doing a lot of cabbage, you can add another teaspoon of salt in between, but don't add too much in the beginning or else the first few batches of cabbage will be too salty. Now, all the cabbage are cooked and chilled. We can layer them up like this and chop them into around 1/4 inch pieces. As you can see that the cabbage are way softer now so that they can easily be piled up. If the pieces are too small to layer, you can just keep the bigger pieces on top to cover up the small ones for a better grip. Now you might think that, oh, I have a food processor. I can just drop in my cabbage and let the food processor do its thing, right? Well, technically that will work, but it's not the best way to do so. Because it is hard for the food processor to evenly chop out the cabbage without making it too small. And when each piece is smaller than 1/4 inch, you will lose the crunchy texture and a refreshing flavor in the stuffing. So if you want to make a great dumplings, I still recommend you to hand chop your cabbage. Now all the cabbage is chopped and cooked, we can put them into a big mixing bowl and start kneading it. This step will physically press out the water remains in the cabbage, and with that tiny amount of salt they soaked in earlier, this will be very easy. Just keep kneading it for around 2 minutes till you can tell that the cabbage are softened up like this. You can start squeezing out the water. This is definitely the most tiring step of the whole recipe because to make sure most of the water is squeezed out, we want to repeatedly doing this for at least 3 times. You can see that each time we're trying to squeeze it, there's less and less water coming out, but still feels like there's more. We don't need it to be completely dry, so just try as good as you can so that there's not too much water in our stuffing later. In some recipe, they may tell you that squeezing out the cabbage water is not that important. That method is not completely wrong wrong because we do want some juiciness in our stuffing. But everybody bought their cabbage in different location and there's different water content in each cabbage. So without forcing it out and then add more water in later, you cannot really control how much water content is inside and it will lower your success rate. To add in the water content back into the stuffing, today we're gonna use the broth to replace the water from the cabbage. So if your cabbage is very watery and we add in more broth, it is most likely that your dumpling will break during the boiling process. You can literally see how much water that I forced out just now. Now the ground pork has its time to absorb the seasoning. We're going to mix in our broth first. You can use chicken broth, vegan broth, or today I'm using a Japanese dashi broth just because I have some in hand. Add in the broth in 3 parts and again stir and mix in one direction, either with a chopstick or your hand. You can feel that the stuffing go from this harder consistency to this pasty look. It takes me around 90 seconds to 2 minutes to combine them well together. And again, if you prefer a more bouncy pork texture, you can keep mixing in and smashing it, and the more you do that, the chewier it will be. Now when that's all done, you can add in your cabbage. Same thing, mix it for around 2 minutes until the cabbage and stuffing are not separable, and put it into the fridge for 30 minutes so it's chilled and easier to wrap. But if you're in a rush, you can just skip this step because while you're wrapping the dumplings, it still have time for the stuffing to rest inside the wrappers. Now, the stuffing is ready, let's wrap our dumplings. Get a wrap and scoop in some stuffing in the center like this. Depends on your experience, the more you put in, the better the overall taste, but also the harder it will be to wrap it together. So I'll recommend you to start little and work your way up. Because there is some starch on the surface of the wrapper to prevent them from sticking together, we can add some water on one side of the ring to make it stick better. If you figure you add too much stuffing, just scoop them out like this and keep wrapping. Fold the wrapper up and close up all sides with no excess air inside the dumplings. And give them a simple fold like this to create a beautiful pattern. And done! One down. Here's another very common way to wrap dumplings. Just close them up like the first one and hold the outer wrappers between both of your thumbs and forefingers and slightly push them into the center of the dumpling. You can see the dumpling stomach puff up like this and it's done. This is the most simple way to wrap dumplings, but I personally think it is not as pretty as the first method. What do you think? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Now all of our dumplings are ready. I'm going to keep most of them frozen for New Year's and cook some for dinners tonight. Bring a big pot of water to boil and add in some salt. Use a spoon or spatula to push your water to create a flow and one by one add in your dumplings. Doing this will prevent the dumpling from sticking on the bottom of the pot, and using a lid can also help track the heat in and speeding up the temperature rising. But you'll have to keep stirring in between until the water temperature rises up to mild boiling again, so the water itself can lift up the dumpling from the bottom and you can see that the dumplings moving around with the natural flow. Keep it covered until it starts rapid boiling like this and add in 100 grams of cold water. And remember that we add broth into our stuffing. These broth will turn into steam and blow up and break the dumplings. Adding water can lower the water temperature to stop the rapid boiling so the dumplings are less likely to break. Another thing is that cold water will quickly tighten up the skin and make the skin more chewy instead of mushy. We'll repeat this step for 2 times and done! The pork and cabbage dumplings are ready. Aw, they look so appetizing. Dip it into the dumpling sauce and give it a try. Look at this juice coming out. This is why we add in those broths from the beginning. Careful, don't burn yourself. The sauce recipe is in the description box down below for you. Enjoy! Thank you for cooking with me to the end. Let me know if you like this recipe by giving this video a thumbs up. It's only gonna take you a second, but it means a lot to me. I make video on this channel every Monday and Thursday, so remember to hit that bell and you'll never miss out. Last but not least, don't forget to subscribe on my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!